When the security team finally pulled up to that massive estate on Hillcrest Drive, the first thing they saw wasn't the water still draining from the property or the broken furniture scattered across the front lawn. No, it was a golden retriever lying motionless near the porch steps, its fur matted with mud and debris, and standing just a few feet away was the homeowner himself, billionaire Marcus Sterling, screaming into his phone that the dog had destroyed everything, that it had gone completely insane. And as those words left his mouth, nobody in that driveway knew yet that they were looking at a hero, not a villain. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back exactly 72 hours to when Marcus Sterling kissed his wife goodbye and told her he'd only be gone for 3 days, because that's when everything was still perfect, that's when the house still felt like a fortress, and that's when a dog named Cooper was just the family pet who liked to sleep at the foot of his daughter's bed. Marcus Sterling wasn't the kind of billionaire you see in movies. He didn't throw parties on yachts or collect sports cars just because he could. He was the quiet kind, the kind who built his fortune through decades of real estate development and who valued privacy more than publicity. And what mattered most to him wasn't the empire he'd built, it was the family waiting for him at home, his wife Elena, his 7-year-old daughter Lily, and his elderly mother Grace, who had moved in with them 2 years ago after her hip surgery. And then there was Cooper, a 4-year-old golden retriever that Lily had picked out from a shelter when he was just a pup, and from the moment that dog came home, he became her shadow, her protector, and the first one to greet anyone who walked through the front door. Marcus trusted his home because he had built it to be trusted. The estate sat on 3 acres with a state-of-the-art security system, backup generators, smart sensors on every door and window, and a staff that checked in daily, so when he boarded his private jet to fly across the country for a series of investor meetings, he didn't think twice about leaving his family behind. He never imagined that the thing he should have worried about wasn't coming from outside the walls but from beneath the ground itself. The first morning without Marcus felt completely normal. Elena made pancakes for Lily while Grace sat at the kitchen table reading the news on her tablet, and Cooper did what he always did. He sat right next to Lily's chair waiting for her to accidentally drop a piece of bacon, and she always did because that was their little secret. And by mid-morning the house was filled with the kind of peaceful quiet that only comes when a family is comfortable in their routine. Lily spent the afternoon playing in her room while Elena worked on her laptop in the study, and Cooper followed Lily everywhere, lying on the floor while she built towers out of blocks and only getting up when she got up, because that dog had an instinct for her movements. He always seemed to know what she needed before she even knew it herself, and Grace often joked that Cooper was more attentive than any babysitter they'd ever hired. That evening, a light rain started to fall, nothing unusual for that time of year, and Elena stood at the window watching the droplets slide down the glass, thinking about how peaceful everything felt, completely unaware that miles away, a water main beneath the property had already started to crack, weakened by months of pressure and shifting soil, and that crack was growing wider with every passing hour. By the time everyone went to bed that night, the rain had stopped and the house was silent, and Cooper took his usual spot at the foot of Lily's bed, but something was different about the way he lay there. His ears kept twitching, his nose kept lifting toward the air, and every few minutes he would raise his head and stare at the bedroom door like he was waiting for something to come through it, but Lily was already asleep, so no one noticed. It was just after 2 in the morning when Cooper suddenly stood up, his whole body rigid, his ears flat against his head, and he let out a low whine that Lily didn't hear because she was deep in a dream, but that whine turned into a bark, then another, and then Cooper jumped off the bed and ran to the door, scratching at it with both paws and barking louder than he ever had in the middle of the night, and that's when Elena woke up in her bedroom down the hall, confused and annoyed, wondering why the dog was making so much noise. She got out of bed and walked toward Lily's room to quiet him down, but the moment her bare feet touched the hallway floor, she felt it, cold water, just a thin layer at first, barely covering her toes, and she froze, her brain trying to process what didn't make sense, because why would there be water in the hallway in the middle of the night? And before she could answer that question, the lights flickered once and then went out completely. Elena's heart started pounding as she pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Water was seeping up from the baseboards, spreading across the hardwood floors, rising faster than seemed possible, and Cooper was still barking, still scratching, still desperately trying to get her attention, and in that moment, she didn't understand what he was trying to tell her, she just thought he was panicking like she was. She ran to Lily's room and threw open the door, and Cooper immediately bolted past her and grabbed the edge of Lily's blanket in his teeth, pulling it off the bed and waking the little girl with a startled cry, and Elena shouted at the dog to stop, thinking he was making things worse, thinking he was scaring her daughter, but Cooper didn't stop. He jumped onto the bed and started nudging Lily with his nose, pushing her toward the edge. And when Lily finally sat up, confused and crying, the water had already reached the bedroom floor. Elena grabbed her daughter and lifted her into her arms, and that's when she remembered Grace, Marcus's mother, sleeping in the guest room on the other side of the house, the room that sat lower than the rest because of the way the foundation was built, and panic exploded through her chest as she realized the water would reach Grace first. She started running down the hallway with Lily in her arms, but Cooper was already ahead of her, splashing through water that was now up to his belly, barking and running toward Grace's room like he knew exactly what Elena was thinking. And when they reached the door, it wouldn't open, the wood had already swollen from the moisture and it was stuck in the frame, and Elena pushed and kicked but it wouldn't budge. Cooper didn't hesitate, he threw his body against the door again and again, slamming his shoulder into the wood until finally it cracked open just enough for Elena to squeeze through, and what she saw inside made her scream. Grace was still in bed, disoriented and barely awake, and the water in her room was already above the mattress, soaking through the sheets and rising toward her frail body. Elena set Lily down on the highest piece of furniture she could find, a tall dresser near the window, and told her not to move. Then she waded through the freezing water to reach Grace, but the elderly woman couldn't stand on her own, her legs were too weak and the current from the water was too strong, and Elena didn't know how she was going to get everyone out of that house. That's when Cooper did something that still makes Elena cry every time she talks about it. He swam through that dark, freezing water and positioned himself right next to Grace's bed. And when Elena managed to pull the old woman to her feet, Cooper pressed his body against Grace's legs to steady her, walking slowly beside her step by step, keeping her balanced, keeping her from falling, and every time Grace stumbled, that dog was there to catch her. It took them nearly 10 minutes to make it from the guest room to the front of the house, and by then the water was up to Elena's waist and still rising, and she was carrying Lily on her back while guiding Grace with one arm, and Cooper never left their side, not once. Even when the current pushed him under and he came back up coughing and gasping, he kept going. When they finally reached the front door, it was jammed shut from the pressure of the water outside, and Elena felt her hope shatter because she didn't have the strength to break it down, but Cooper started clawing at the base of the door, digging and scratching until his paws were bleeding, and then he rammed his body against it just like he had done before, and after what felt like forever, the door gave way and water rushed out. And they stumbled onto the porch just as the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. Elena collapsed on the wet grass with Lily and Grace beside her, all three of them shivering and crying, and Cooper stood a few feet away, his legs shaking, his fur soaked with mud and something darker that Elena realized was blood from his torn paws, and before she could even thank him, he lay down on the ground and didn't get back up. The next few hours were chaos. Neighbors came running, emergency services arrived, and someone managed to reach Marcus on his phone to tell him what had happened, and he dropped everything and flew home immediately, his mind racing with every worst-case scenario. But nobody told him the full story. They just said there had been a flood and everyone was okay, so when his car pulled into that driveway and he saw the destruction, he wasn't prepared. The beautiful home he had built was gutted, furniture was destroyed, walls were stained with water lines, and standing in the middle of it all was Elena, exhausted and in shock, and nearby was Cooper, lying in the mud, barely moving, and Marcus's brain did what any overwhelmed brain would do, it looked for something to blame. He saw the scratches on the doors, the torn curtains, the chaos that the dog had left in his wake, and he didn't see a rescue, he saw destruction. And before Elena could explain, Marcus started shouting, asking why no one had controlled the dog, asking what Cooper had done, saying the dog must have panicked and made everything worse, and in that moment, Elena was too exhausted to fight, too drained to find the words. So she just stood there crying while Marcus called the vet and told them to come get the dog because he couldn't even look at him. Cooper was taken away that afternoon, injured and confused, and no one spoke to him gently, no one thanked him. And as the van pulled away, Lily screamed and reached for him through the window, but Marcus held her back, telling her the dog needed help, telling her everything would be okay, not knowing that he had just sent away the only reason his family was still alive. For 2 days, Marcus buried himself in insurance calls and contractor meetings, refusing to talk about Cooper, refusing to acknowledge the guilt creeping into his chest every time Lily asked where her dog was, and Elena tried to tell him what happened, but he kept cutting her off, saying he didn't want to hear excuses, saying he saw the damage with his own eyes. It wasn't until the 3rd day that everything changed, because that's when the security company came to review the footage from the estate's backup cameras that Marcus had forgotten were connected to a cloud server that kept recording even after the power went out, and when they pulled up the files and pressed play, the room went completely silent. The footage showed everything. It showed Cooper waking up before anyone else, pacing the hallway and barking at the floor where the water was starting to seep through. It showed him running to Lily's room and desperately trying to wake the family. It showed him throwing his body against doors and guiding Grace through chest-deep water and never once leaving anyone behind. And as Marcus watched, his hand started shaking. The final clip showed Cooper standing on the porch after everyone was safe, his body trembling, his paws leaving bloody prints on the concrete, and instead of lying down to rest, he turned back toward the house like he was making sure no one else was still inside, and only then, only after he was certain his family was safe, did he finally collapse. Marcus didn't say a word when the footage ended. He just stood up and walked out of the room, and Elena found him 20 minutes later sitting in his car in the driveway, sobbing into his hands, saying over and over again that he had blamed him, he had sent him away, he had looked at a hero and called him a problem, and the guilt was so heavy that he could barely breathe. He drove to the animal hospital that night and asked to see Cooper, and when they brought the dog out, bandaged and limping but still wagging his tail the moment he saw a familiar face, Marcus dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around that dog and apologized in a way he had never apologized to anyone in his life. He told Cooper he was sorry, he told him he didn't understand, he told him he would never make that mistake again. And Cooper, because dogs forgive in ways humans never could, just licked his face and leaned into him like nothing had ever gone wrong. When Marcus brought Cooper home the next morning, Lily ran across the lawn so fast she nearly tripped, and she threw herself onto that dog and held him like she was never going to let go, and Grace, who had barely spoken since the flood, walked over slowly and placed her hand on Cooper's head and whispered thank you with tears streaming down her face, and in that moment, standing in front of his damaged home with his whole family gathered around a dog who had given everything to save them, Marcus finally understood what real loyalty looked like. He didn't build a statue or make some grand public gesture because that's not who he was, but what he did do was make sure Cooper never spent another night alone. He cleared his schedule to be home more often. He sat on the floor with Lily and let Cooper climb into his lap even though the dog was way too big for that, and every single night before bed, he would kneel down and look into those soft brown eyes and say thank you, because some debts can't be repaid. They can only be honored. And now I have to ask you something, because this story made me think about how quickly we judge, how easily we blame, how often we look at chaos and assume the worst without stopping to ask what really happened. So if you had come home to that scene, if you had seen the scratches and the mess and the injured dog lying in the mud, would you have trusted him? Would you have looked past the destruction to see the sacrifice? Or would you have done exactly what Marcus did and only realized the truth when it was almost too late? I really want to know. So leave your answer in the comments because I think this is a conversation worth having. And if this story touched you the way it touched me, if it made you think about the dogs in your life or the people who protect you in ways you don't always see, then please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Send it to a dog lover, send it to a parent, send it to anyone who's ever been judged before they were understood, because stories like this one remind us that heroes don't always look the way we expect. Sometimes they have 4 legs and a wagging tail and a heart bigger than we'll ever deserve.